back, everybody. This is our third and final session of our Diversity and Inclusion in the Construction Industry program. And we have a really impressive panel that we've pulled together of construction industry leaders who are going to talk to everybody about diversity and inclusion efforts that they have made within their company, what has been working for them, what hasn't been working for them, where they think these efforts are headed in the future. And we're excited for a very candid and open discussion among the panel members, but also we certainly welcome questions from the audience because we really do want this to be a collaborative session. So with that, I'm going to introduce a few of our panel members. First, we've got Michael Russell, and he is the CEO of H.J. Russell. Michael was promoted to the Chief Executive Officer in October of 2003, succeeding his father, Herman Russell, who founded the company in 1952 and led H.J. Russell for 50 years. Michael's a 28-year veteran of the construction and real estate development industry. He is charged with leading the company to greater heights as it embarks on its next 50 years. The company's operational focus will be in construction and program management, real estate development, and property management. Michael is also very active in the community in business and civic organizations. This is a lot of boards, Michael, by the way, but it's very impressive. He serves on the boards of various organizations, including the Metro Atlanta Chamber Executive Committee, Commerce Club, the SunTrust Atlanta Bank Advisory Board, Georgia State University's J. Mac Robinson College of Business Advisory Board, and the University of Virginia Foundation Board. Michael is also a member of the Atlanta Rotary Club and 100 Black Men. We also have Patrick Blake. Patrick used to live in Atlanta, but now he serves as Turner Construction's Chief Legal Officer in Turner's New York City headquarters. He has been with the company since February of 2019. In his role, Patrick serves on Turner's executive leadership team and provides strategic counsel to senior management. Patrick is responsible for Turner's legal and compliance departments, which support all domestic and international business units in the risk assessment and negotiation of contracts for new work. He's responsible for the day-to-day operation of projects and departments, the avoidance and resolution of disputes, compliance matters, and corporate governance. In his capacity as Chief Legal Officer, he also oversees the legal strategy for all major claims for Turner Construction. Then we also have Bridget Broyard, who is the Procurement and Equal Business Opportunity Manager with CIM Group, the developer of Centennial Yards in downtown Atlanta. And for those of you who are not located in Atlanta, Bridget is going to give you an overview of what an amazing and gigantic project that is. Bridget started her career with the Atlanta Committee for the Olympic Games and went on to hold several positions with IBM Corporation in both Atlanta and Los Angeles. After a brief transition into technology sales, Bridget entered the field of diversity and inclusion as the director of programs for a consulting firm whose primary client was Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. As a third-generation Atlanta native and graduate of Howard University, Bridget's love for her community is the primary reason she is so passionate about equity and inclusion. She is also a supporting parent and advocacy volunteer for special needs families with Parent to Parent of Georgia, and her greatest joy and accomplishment is her 19-year-old son, Trey, who has autism. John?
Yep, thank you, Debbie. I'm here. I want to introduce two other panelists and then our moderator for this afternoon's program. Also joining us is Sara VanDeCarr. Sara is with Suffolk Construction. She serves as the VP and Associate General Counsel and Corporate Compliance Officer with Suffolk. She's responsible for advising the company nationally on all employment law and corporate legal matters and ensuring the firm's compliance with legal, regulatory, and ethical obligations. Sara also oversees the Trade Partner Diversity Team at Suffolk and is co-chair of Suffolk's Diversity and Inclusion Council. Prior to joining Suffolk, Sara practiced law in Boston in the areas of construction law, employment law, and litigation. She is a proud graduate of the University of Vermont and Suffolk University Law School. Our next panelist is Thomas Giordano, who's the Senior Vice President and General Counsel of Construction for Lendlease Americas, where he has served or been employed since December of 2004. Tom leads a team of attorneys there who are responsible for the delivery of legal services to Lendlease's $3.5 billion construction business unit across the Americas, including structuring contracts for commercial, residential, and social infrastructure projects that range in excess of $3 billion. Tom frequently delivers training modules internally and presents for industry events on legal, commercial, risk, and regulatory compliance, best practices, also on corporate human resources policies, collective bargaining strategy, and issues related to gender and racial discrimination. Tom serves on the corporation's Regional Executive Committee for Construction to evaluate commercial strategies, risks, and opportunities. He received his Juris Doctorate from Fordham University School of Law and his undergraduate degree from Fordham College, as he says, a long time ago. Next is our moderator, Angela Payne-James. Angela is the Diversity and Inclusion Partner at Alston & Bird. And in that role, she leads Alston & Bird's governance and management of diversity and inclusion initiatives to align with the firm's overall goals. Before joining the firm, Angela was the managing director, chief legal or global chief of staff for Goldman Sachs Technology Division. She also served on Goldman's Technology Executive Leadership Group and Technology Division Risk Committee. Before that, Angela was with Alston & Bird, and we are very happy to have her back after her divergence at Goldman Sachs. At Alston & Bird, Angela was a partner in the Litigation and Trial Practice Group and Intellectual Property Litigation Groups. She was a member of the Diversity Steering Committee, where she helped develop the firm's strategies, programs, and panels. She's also served as chair of the Diversity Committee in the firm's Atlanta office. She is the past recipient of the firm's Diversity Leadership Award. She is the founding board member of the Women's Collective and a member of Leadership Atlanta. She did all of that after graduating cum laude from Harvard Law School and serving as a clerk in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First District. So I want to welcome all of the panelists. I want to welcome and appreciate Angela for serving as the moderator for this panel. And I will turn it over to Angela now to begin the program.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you, Debbie. We are really excited about today's discussion. I do want to just thank you for your individual leadership in putting this construction or diversity and construction summit together. It's an incredibly timely topic, and I hope that this discussion and the other discussions today will be helpful to all of our attendees. So with that, I will turn to get our conversation started. One note, we will try to have some time set aside at the end for questions, but if you have questions along the way, please feel free to use the Q&A feature, which is found at the bottom of your screen. And I will be monitoring that to see if we have anything that we want to talk about at that moment based on the particular topic. So with that, we will get started. I think one of the ways to set the table when we talk about diversity and inclusion is, of course, talking about why it's important. We all agree that it's important. We wouldn't be here if we didn't think it was important. But I think sometimes it's helpful really to hear from people about why did they personally connect with diversity and inclusion? Why have they devoted a great deal of their personal and professional time to diversity and inclusion? So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to share with us why they pursue and focus on diversity and inclusion, both from their personal perspectives as well as from their company's perspectives. Why is it important? Is it a business imperative? Is it a moral imperative? Is it both? So with that, I will ask Michael to kick off our discussion.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Angela, and honored to be here with the rest of my colleagues in the construction industry. So why is diversity and inclusion important? I think is various reasons. Obviously, I represent a second generation African-American firm that I'm heading now, and we've always valued diversity, and we look at it as a strength, in a company. Certainly not a mandate, not something that should be required, but it's a strength. And if you look at our organization, you truly believe that. Now, from a broader perspective, I just think it gives people access. I think programs, the intent of programs is to provide access where access probably would not be provided otherwise. And through different programs, you have firms and individuals who have an opportunity to have a seat at the table and have an opportunity to participate. That's the American dream. Is how can you grow a business? How can you be successful and participate in this economy? I think is important. And also when you think about diverse firms, if you really look at the makeup of diverse firms, they tend to be more diverse also. So when you hire those firms, what you're also doing is bringing more diverse people to the workforce, which I think is also very important as you look at how do you get more people to the table. And last but not least is the concept of equity. How do you make sure that people have an opportunity, that everybody has an opportunity to participate, and at the end of the day, that makes for better community, better neighborhoods, and just a better quality of life for all of us. So I think I'll stop there, Angela.
That's great. Yeah, access, equity, and a better community for all of us. I could not agree more. Sara, would you like to share with us why diversity and inclusion is important to you and to your company?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks, Angela, and happy to be here today. I think, there's a business necessity. Obviously, we've seen study after study show the benefits that bringing a diverse workforce to the table brings. I've seen it personally. The diverse teams that I've been a part of have been those that have been the most innovative, the most creative, and at the end of the day, the most successful. So I see it from that standpoint. I think, as a woman in the construction industry, as a member of the LGBTQ community in the construction industry, it's a deeply personal issue for me as well. I have struggled in the past, to be candid, with bringing my whole self to work. We've made great strides in the industry in the past decade in that regard, and I'm happy to say that it's a different environment now. But because I think of that experience, I want to make sure that all of my colleagues can show up as themselves at work. I see that as the way to growth for the company, to enable us all to reach that full potential. So I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's exactly what we hear from our clients too, in terms of the success of diverse teams and what they bring in terms of perspectives and problem solving. I thought it was also interesting that you talked about bringing your whole self to work and why that's personally important to you, because we hear a lot about that too. And hopefully when we get into some of the specific D&I programs, we can talk a little bit about how do you make your company a place where people feel that they can bring their whole selves to work.
Absolutely.
So Bridget,
yes.
Would you like to share with us your thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Angela. For me, CIM is building Centennial Yards in downtown Atlanta, and we're going to create 12 to 15 new city blocks in the heart of downtown Atlanta. So for us, and for me personally, being a native of Atlanta, it's really exciting to know that we have an opportunity to bring, diverse and minority, small, female-owned businesses into the fold to be able to create this development, not just for 1 year or 2 years, but for probably the next 5 to 10 to even 15 years. So it's very exciting. And it's also very, as Michael and Sara have pointed out, the access to be able to participate in something, of this magnitude could change the entire trajectory of some of these smaller minority or female firms.
Thank you. That's great. Again, talking about access and the importance of that as a first step when we think about how we get to equity. Patrick.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm honored to be part of this panel. I want to seize on one of the words that Sara mentioned about creating the right environment. That's a phrase we use a lot at Turner. We want to create the right environment for our employees. And we view diversity and inclusion as being a big part of that. Like, everybody deserves the right to come to work and see themselves and to be able to be themselves when they get to work. Unfortunately, that isn't always the case in the construction industry. A recent survey showed that 65% of people have witnessed a racist event on the job site. And of those people who witnessed an event, 77% said that nobody did anything about it. So I'm glad to participate in the discussion, and I think we have a lot of work to do. And I think the people who are participating in this panel, as well as the people who are attending the conference, are in a unique role to be able to help and move this forward and advance the conversation.
Thank you. Wow, those are very disheartening statistics, but I know that we will circle back to that because we want to really drill down on how do we change the culture in our industry and how do we change the culture in our own organizations and companies. An uphill battle, but a battle worth taking on. So lastly, I'll turn to Tom on that question of why D&I is important to you and why is it important to your company?
Thanks, Angela. And I too would like to first thank Alston and Bird and for the ability to participate with this panel today, this esteemed panel. It's an honor. You had said, from a personal perspective, I would say that it's founded for me in our United States Constitution, which I believe, I fully believe that all men and women should be treated equally under the law. And I think that is grounded for me personally in the faith that I was raised in, I came from a Judeo-Christian background where one of the first commandments was to, and most important commandments was to love thy neighbor as thyself and to treat people the way you expect to be treated. And I think for me, that's translated into why I find Lendlease such a good fit and have for 16 years. I believe that Lendlease is also a company that has a very strong value system. I think we have very high ideals and aspirations for how we treat our people and our clients and how we create the best places for the people who we create our places for. And I think that diversity and inclusion is a way to make sure on top of all that you are, it's good business. You're getting the best ideas from the biggest range of contributors. So that's really the reason why I find it compelling and why I'm personally and from a company I'm committed to it.
Thank you. That's really great. The golden rule, always good to be reminded of. I agree with you. I mean, that's what it comes down to when we talk about diversity and inclusion and equity. Simple, but sometimes hard to implement. So Sara, I wanted to ask you about the definition of diversity. We talk about diversity, but what do we mean when we say diversity? And what does that mean at your company? Obviously, there's a lot of different types of diversity. What are those that you all focus on and why?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's funny, when Suffolk really started its diversity and inclusion journey in a very formal kind of earnest way, I don't know, three and a half years ago, one of the first things we had to tackle was defining what this means for our company so that everyone kind of level set on what we're talking about here. And the way we define it and the way I think most people define it is it's very broad. It's not just race, it's not just gender, it's not just ethnicity, it's age, it's disability status, it's socioeconomic status. And it's diversity of thought. I think, it's funny at Suffolk, when I joined the company about 10 years ago, all I heard was, Suffolk is full of type A personalities. We get bleep done. That's how we operate, which is great for a construction company, right? But not everyone operates on a type A personality continuum, and that's okay. And we need that kind of diversity of personality and thought to come together and have a very well-rounded approach. So we're very broad in the way we define it, and I think incrementally we've been able to really expand the types of people we're bringing together in the workforce.
And has that been intentional? In other words, I mean, are there programs where you say, hey, let's not just bring in the same type of person? Did that affect how you did your recruiting or interview process?
Yeah, absolutely. And with a lot of this stuff, we've had to really drill down into the nuts and bolts of our policies and procedures and the detail work, so that we set the structures up so that we're getting rid of that bias. And we've made a very intentional effort to be more open, to bring in that broader range of candidates. And it's hard. I mean, there's a lot in the construction industry, I think in particular, there's a lot of, I know so-and-so, we all gravitate towards people that look like us or went to the same college as us, things like that. So it's breaking habits, it's changing culture. It's not easy, but there's some very intentional, explicit things we can do. And certainly our recruiting practices, our sourcing strategies, those types of things have really evolved over the years.
That's great. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that? Different types of diversity and how your company is bringing a broader, maybe definition to that term?
Yes, Angela, I'd like to speak to the fact that there's also an issue with ageism in terms of diversity and inclusion, because we have, two opposite ends of the workforce. We have more seasoned individuals, and then we have a lot of millennials coming in. And I think that there's an opportunity there, I know in our company, in bridging that gap and pulling out, what is good, not what is good, but what is beneficial in both of those work employees, and making them, cohesive and learning from one another. So that's been something that we've really been intentional about in our firm.
That's great, because it takes intentionality. On that point, do you all have specific goals set up for your D&I programs?
Yes, we are. We just started a new diversity and inclusion council internally in our firm. And so we are creating those goals as we speak, in light of everything that has happened in this year. So we're including, age as well as race, gender, all of those things.
That's great. Does anyone else want to share what what's been established internally in terms of goals? It's obviously very broad, but when you set up a program that focuses on diversity and inclusion, that's one of the first questions you ask, right? Is what is the purpose of this? What are we trying to achieve with this? And sometimes it's hard to know what that is, but sometimes some companies have very specific goals. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I think at Lendlease we track data, and we do have unpublished goals. We believe that what gets written down and repeated actually creates momentum, and so we do that. Yeah. And we also, to close the loop, we also solicit feedback from our employees on a regular basis and look at and track that data. And I think that it's hard to make progress, as you had said, great ideals, but hard to implement. Angela, you had said that. That's very true. And I think that without starting to come up with something that's quantified and measurable, the progress does not necessarily get made in the way you want it to. So yes, we do.
I'll just add, at Turner, one goal we talk about is we want our workforce to reflect the communities in which we work. And so, like Lendlease, we have lots of data. We conducted an equity audit recently. And a lot of times when companies conduct an equity audit, It's usually under the cloak of privilege because that information can be dangerous in the wrong hands. But we committed to our employees that we would share that information we have. Say this is where we are, and we want to improve.
What are some of the metrics that you look at when you talk about an equity audit? What specific factors do you look at to figure out where you are in terms of equity?
So we're looking at demographics, certainly age, gender, race, and then also the different types of job categories that people fall in and where they are in their career progression. See, like, okay, is there anything we need to change? Are there any stumbling blocks? Are we recruiting from diverse schools, that sort of thing?
When we think about those different factors, I'm just curious if any of your companies take a look at compensation or gender pay gaps. I know that that's something people are asking more about, but that is a process. I'm just curious if anybody has moved in that direction.
We do, and within the gender category, we are within 1% of one another between male and female. So yes, we absolutely do.
That's great. Because I agree with you. You said it earlier, you can't change what you don't track. And so it's tracking, getting the data, monitoring it, figuring out what it means, and then pivoting if the data shows that that's what is needed. Michael, I wanted to ask you about your company and what kind of training or education do you offer for your employees? Training is very big right now. A lot of companies and organizations are focusing on unconscious bias training. So I was just curious if that's something that you all have done and what you found to be effective.
Well, yes, we have really this year, really probably like most people, we've been certainly much more in tune and sensitive to making sure that we are creating and have the environment that encourages inclusion and different perspectives. So yes, we have done. We've had some different seminars. We have brought in some resources to help around sensitivity training in general, and we're certainly doing some things externally too to make sure that we're being impactful with our diversity program. So, but I think you were focusing internally. But yes, we are. I mean, obviously, we're much smaller than when you look at the firms, Turner and Bovis, and obviously Suffolk, much larger firms. But for a firm our size, yeah, we can do that and be impactful in a shorter time frame because we just have fewer people that we're dealing with, and we are definitely doing that. And frankly, within our company, that's already it is diverse. I think it's just a matter of making sure we're being sensitive to what everybody's needs are and making sure that we still are fostering an environment that's inclusive. So
that's great. I'd love to hear from our other panelists about training, and particularly if you're doing anything really innovative or that's been really effective. Diversity and sensitivity trainings have been around for quite a while, and there's a lot of debate about what works, right? So I'm just curious to hear if other folks are doing interesting things on training and education.
Yeah, Angela, I think one of the things we've learned, and I've learned these lessons through doing compliance trainings as well, is that it's got to be more than a check the box, program. And for us, what's worked since the George Floyd murder over the summer, we started doing a series of listening sessions, which I think a lot of companies have done, to really get at some honest and transparent conversation. And I think we we had a little bit of a reckoning, I think, where people were starting to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And so those listening sessions were incredibly impactful, and not training per se, but certainly were learning experiences for a lot of people, namely for our leadership. And from there, we as a company actually brought in an outside consultant to lead some discussion trainings. And they were, focused on sensitivity, focused on some educational pieces, but again, really guided discussions more than anything else to get people to really open up and talk. And for us, we found that to be the most impactful in terms of training.
That's great. I think a lot happens in those one-on-one conversations, especially if they're guided. It helps people get past their discomfort. And once you're past your discomfort, you can learn and you can grow. So I think that's great. I'd love to hear from other folks how you're getting feedback from your people in terms of what they want to see. The discussion groups are certainly one way. Another way it could be surveys and other things. Is anybody else reaching out to your people to say, what can we do better, or what can we share with you in terms of learning or education or support?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Every day there are 110,000 people who work on Turner job sites. And those aren't all Turner employees. We only have about 10,500 of our own employees. So as an industry, we have a shared workforce, and we have a number of different trainings and facilitated discussions that we have internally, as well as with our trade partners at the job site. Just so it's not enough to train our own people, to have these discussions amongst our own people, because our people are working on job sites with the shared workforce. So those have been very helpful, and also training people on how to have a conversation. So we have a training module all about courageous conversations, how you do that, and you respect one another.
That's great. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Thank you. We have had unconscious bias training company-wide within our company, as well as diversity and inclusion surveys, to just kind of give the employees an opportunity to speak candidly, and answer questions that they may not feel comfortable, saying to their managers. So we're in the process of compiling the results from those surveys currently.
Okay. That's great.
I was going to add the unconscious bias training myself, which we have rolled out throughout our managers in the company, and I think it's have received feedback that it is highly effective, really, for people to acknowledge that creating initial judgments about everything is something that is built into the way we're our behavior, and that you need to recognize that as a real good first step, and acknowledge that it's not abnormal to make judgments based on what you see before you have the evidence behind it, but to know that it's a fact, and then to really try to check it and change your behavior over time, I think is highly effective. The other thing is that we do every 6 months an engagement survey, where we benchmark ourselves against high-performing companies, and we always make sure to have D&I questions on those to make sure that we're getting it right, and that these are anonymous survey results where you can get real feedback and see how you're doing. So a couple of things that are effective.
That's great. You talked a little bit about training and the engagement surveys that you're doing. Have you faced any particular challenges when it comes to implementing your D&I initiatives, Tom?
Yes, and I'm going to say this, that as has been mentioned by some of the other panelists, these are very personal matters, and it really helps to have people in a room together and able to kind of measure expressions, measure people's body languages and gestures, and the way they relate to one another. these past months have been made that more difficult. And I think, facing George Floyd and these other current events without being able to actually, not only with, restrictions on being able to be personal, but just being able to, in person, but to touch, to have those abilities to relate to one another has been, I think, a real challenge in trying to make progress and get past them. So yes, those have been tough and remains that way.
Yeah, no, and you raise a couple of very good points. There are challenges generally because of the personal nature, and then we're in this very specific, in many cases, remote environment where we are communicating with one another over Zoom, and it is difficult to read body language and pick up the nonverbal cues. So that's a good segue to the question. Has COVID-19 or how has COVID-19 impacted your diversity initiatives? And we want to also talk about George Floyd and the incidents in the spring with multiple killings of unarmed Black and brown men and women. That happened, and then we had COVID. Then that happened, and those are really two big issues for D&I. They can create opportunities, or they can create challenges, or both. And I think for many of us, it's both. So, Tom addressed this, but I would love to hear from each of you on that. What are the challenges to your D&I programs? And to the extent that COVID and the racial justice movement that has been really taking over our country, how have those things impacted your initiatives? Because we're just living in a very unique time, and there's so many issues facing so many people. So I will kick it to Patrick and then Michael, and then we'll go from there.
So maybe our Inclusion Action Committee might give a more nuanced approach, but I haven't seen any impact that COVID has had on our D&I initiatives. We were dealing with COVID, and we started dealing with racial justice, and we've attacked both in a very serious way. I think that there are some industries where you see where COVID and the distinction between essential workers and non-essential workers has highlighted inequities. But in the construction industry, where everyone in most jurisdictions is considered to be essential, we're all at work. And so we're just tackling this problem while we also work on construction.
Michael?
Yes, I think Tom, he said it well. It's difficult to deal with some of these sensitive subjects via Zoom and some of the different vehicles we're having to use. But at the same time, we can't afford to not move the ball forward. So, I think we all are having to just be creative. It might be smaller groups. It might be smaller Zoom groups. It might be some in-person meetings. So you just have to be creative, because we can't afford to say we're going to, sit on our hands until, COVID, until this crisis passes over. So you have to do the best you can, but it has affected it. And I think we all are just having to adjust and pivot to keep the ball moving.
I want to stay with you just for 1 second, because with your company being, more diverse, as you pointed out, did the racial justice incidents of the spring, did that have any particular effect for your employees? I know certainly in many companies, ours included, for our Black and brown attorneys, it was a particularly difficult time, and there was really a need to focus on that and try to focus on morale and opportunities to vent and share. Did that occur, do you think, in any greater way with your company?
Yeah, I think the events that happened this summer affected most Americans, Black and white, and in an impactful way. So certainly from my perspective, it was more of, I think, reaffirmation and communication around it. We've always, as I said, believed in diversity. I I kind of doubled down, from my perspective, doubled down on what we were going to do internally. You can talk about what's happening externally, but we made a commitment, and I had a statement that I put out on our social media, which was really just reaffirming some things. Diversity is a strength. It shouldn't be a mandate, or it certainly isn't a liability. It's a strength. Diverse vendors are going to have a seat at our table. We're going to it's really a reaffirmation of that. And it's led us to do some different things around everyone. We have an opportunity to grow at our company, which I think Sara mentioned, that when her opening comments, people have to feel comfortable in our environment so they can grow and we can grow. And really just, again, given our history as Black entrepreneurs, I mean, we will continue to be a beacon of Black entrepreneurship is really, and I'm talking for the Russell company and some of the things we're doing as the Russell family around that, to be impactful there. So again, it was reaffirmation and then communicating what was important to us. And it's led us to put some resources around it's led us to put money around resources that are helping us make sure that we talk the talk. I mean, we walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Right.
So we're right in the middle of that right now, like everybody is. But that was the impact it had on us.
Okay. I'd like to get to our other panelists so everyone can weigh in on that. We do have a few, we have an audience question, but I wanted to finish this topic before we move to that. Sara, Tom, Bridget, challenges, anything particular coming out of COVID-19 and the racial justice movement?
I know for us at CIM, it gave us an opportunity, as Patrick mentioned, to have some courageous conversations that I don't think were being had prior openly. And I think that it has allowed us to, hear from some of the leadership within our company. And on the Diversity Council, our internal Diversity Council, once we heard from them, a lot of the employees said that it made them feel, a lot better to know that it was something that was being addressed and not just overlooked. Right. And so it has allowed us to have some conversations that I don't think were being had before.
Yeah, I think that's been important, the need to feel heard and feel seen, I think. Mm-hmm. Sara?
I was just going to add, and Bridget and Michael touched on this, just the role of our senior leadership throughout this, the past 6 months. It's been a challenge on so many different levels. And I think with respect to the social justice movement, hearing Michael come out and say, we communicated, we reaffirmed, and Bridget as well from a leadership perspective. For Suffolk, hearing from our CEO was hugely important. Hearing him come out with a very strong statement and doing, personal listening sessions with our Black and Brown employees, I think was critical. And one of the silver linings, I think, coming out of this is that we have rededicated resources, and I feel, action is taking place now that I don't think would have been. I think the pace of our D&I initiatives has really increased over the past 3 months. And, it's a shame that it takes something like this to really push things forward, but it has, and it's done it in a really authentic way. And I think, we have to just keep that momentum going. And the only other quick thing I wanted to say about COVID is I think it, in a lot of ways, we've learned to adapt to this new online Zoom environment. And, I'm mindful of working moms and working dads. And I think from a D&I perspective, we've really tried to, in, conjunction with our HR function, carve out some space to really look at how do we support parents? How do we support single moms? How do we support, people with elderly parents? So there's a lot of good coming out of this that I think will go well into the future.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have a young parents task force we just created for that very purpose, because for folks with young kids at home, this has been a trying time. And especially if that bears more on the mom sometimes. And we really want to, make sure that we don't wake up after this with that having impacted our overall diversity and inclusion. So that's a very good point. Tom, did you want to weigh in on challenges specifically around COVID-19 or racial justice?
Sure. And I think with respect to the challenges, I think I touched on it earlier in terms of the inability to, maybe the somewhat of a depersonalization. But Sara makes a terrific point about how the Zoom, technology that we're on has allowed us to really get a window into people's lives in a way that we never did, and to cross-sectionalize in another way as to what is very personal about people's existences and how we have to adapt and how we have to learn from those and be sensitive to them. So I think that's a great positive that's come from this. And I think further to that, it's also allowed and forced people to congregate in a way that's more global, it's more national. People are getting on meetings from all over the country in a way that I think they weren't necessarily doing. Maybe on the phone they were, but not the way they are now. So I think those are all kind of opportunities that have allowed us to take advantage of new insights that have been good.
That's great.
I've
Debbie,
seen
I know
more
we
pets
have
and
a.
babies.
Oh, sorry,
in
go
the
ahead,
past-
Sara.
No, I was just gonna say I've seen more pets and babies and met more family members in the past 6 months than I ever have. So it's been a
So
joy.
So true.
Agreed. So Debbie, I know we have an audience question sort of tying back to some of the themes that we talked about earlier, being authentic, feeling seen and heard, and being comfortable or uncomfortable with all of that.
We do, and it's a great question. Looking back to the beginning of the journey, how do you get employees comfortable to make the disclosures that need to be made about, their status, whether it's, their gender identity or some disability, so that you can collect the data and benchmarking can occur? What recommendations do the panelists have to build that trust at the baseline?
I'll add that we have a number of employee resource groups at Turner. I think last count was somewhere in the 70s, spread throughout the company. And it's a reflection that we are well represented, that the company supports these resource groups and has put funding behind them, and they have executive support. So I think that you have to do things like that. I'm sure there's a lot more, but that creates the right environment where people feel safe.
And kind of following up on that a little bit, are there, so you have these employee resource groups, and these are, kind of small group sessions where people can feel comfortable disclosing, facts about themselves. How about when you do an equity survey, and maybe that's a little bit more slotted to, age, race, gender, and not things that are internal. Does your equity survey ask about gender identity or sexual orientation, or is it a little bit more black and white?
So we have not conducted a survey. We conducted an audit of data that we already have. So we have not reached out to our employees to have them self-identify that information.
Thanks, Debbie. Please jump back in if we have any more audience questions. One quick thing that I wanted to circle back on, unless anybody else wanted to jump in on that question, I'll pause.
No, I had mentioned the engagement surveys that we have every 6 months, and we did ask people on a voluntary and anonymous basis to self-identify, both based on LGBTQI and based on ethnicity, and also based on and disability. So asking those questions, keeping it anonymous, letting people feel safe and comfortable to answer, so that we have a good measure of the data. So
Yeah, I was going to just second. We're in the process of considering whether to do that, and I think the other thing on my mind is, are we culturally at a place here at Suffolk where people can feel comfortable self-identifying? And I think going the anonymous route is a good way to do it. But it's something from a data perspective that we do really want to start to track. So that we can get that important information. The other thing I'll add too is our Build Pride employee resource group is working on a project called Add the Box. So we're, when it comes to self-identifying, making sure that the categories we have open up to options in terms of gender identity and things like that. And I think little things like that send signals to people from day one, from the moment of orientation, that, okay, this is an inclusive company that I'm coming to work for. So that helps kind of set the tone.
And I have one follow-up question. Speaking of tone, Sara, and this is an audience question. How do you get around employees that don't believe racism, sexism, et cetera, is a problem? What do you find is the most effective way in changing deeply ingrained mindsets? And I'm not putting you on the spot. That's for the whole panel. Or maybe that's one of the challenges that we're facing.
Or maybe that's the question. Is that a challenge in your company? Have you found that to be an issue?
It's a tough question to answer. It's not an easy question to answer. And I think maybe that's why you had some reticence in offering one initially. First of all, it's not always so easy to spot. And I think that several of the panelists have sort of said that really it's that positive culture that sets a tone, where I think that if there are people who are not aligned, it might not be the best place for them to work. And they might see that over time, that this isn't the right place for you, because we have an environment that aspires as a value to treat everyone well, everyone equally, and make sure that everyone is being considered and included. And but how do you do that? How do you kind of weed out the bad actors? It's a great question. Love to hear.
I'm sure, and I know we have seen, I'm sure you have all seen, that as you rolled out different trainings on unconscious bias or on privilege, there is pushback among some people. Some people are uncomfortable with these topics. And I think the wrong path is to say, get with the program, you got to do the training and then beat it into a person. It's really, you have to have what we would call a Turner conversation. So a Suffolk conversation, a respectful conversation with those employees to help understand the why. Right? And that's what we do as in-house lawyers. A lot of times we are creating policies, we're enforcing policies, and it's much more effective if you help understand the why behind the policy, the why behind the training.
Let me add, I think, when I listen to the conversation, I think it's critical that we all have operational leaders who believe in this mission of diversity and inclusion, because if you don't, ultimately it's not going to work. If you don't have operational leadership that believes in what this is about, we're all out here on construction jobs, and you have to have a culture. Tom hit on it. If the culture allows somebody to, certainly if it allows somebody to have a racist or a sexist attitude and that's accepted, then it's just not going to work. You have to have a culture that after a while starts to make those employees that feel that way, even if they're great builders. And we all have in my company, we got great white, black people, but some of them don't fit for various reasons. And at some point, if the issue of inclusion is a serious enough corporate priority, that will eventually lead to many of these people moving on to other places where they can be more open and it fits within their views, because you still have companies where that certainly is true.
and that takes me back to something that Patrick mentioned at the beginning, and that is how do we respond when there is a clearly racially motivated incident, because that goes to culture as well. And so, I wanted to ask you, Patrick, as it relates to Turner, how have you responded to racially motivated incidents at project sites when they've occurred?
Yeah, we earlier this year, it's back in June, we had a hate crime perpetrated on one of our job sites. There was some press surrounding this. Someone had placed a noose on a toolbox where a Black employee would find it. And it's sad to say that over the years, this sort of thing has happened. I'm sure it's happened at your companies. It's a heinous act. And so when this happened, we responded, we engaged law enforcement, we conducted an investigation with an external investigator. And ultimately, we kind of narrowed in on who we think was responsible, or generally, it was never conclusive. We retrained everyone, we shut the job down, and we made a big deal about it because it was a big deal. But the response to that incident brought to light other incidents that had happened on job sites. And the job site local leadership had responded in their own way. And there wasn't insight into the response. And we saw that, it's so important that we get this right. And so we need to have a standard, consistent approach to these events. And so over the summer, we worked on our protocol for bias-motivated events. And when you work on a protocol and a policy, as you start to define things and you increase your knowledge. We had a group of people, it's cross-functional, that responds to every single bias-motivated event, whether some might consider it a small thing, like graffiti, racist graffiti and a porch-on, to a noose or a physical altercation. So we have this group that responds usually within 2 hours to every single time that this is discovered. And we have an investigative protocol, and we standardize the approach, and it's been great. So you get a consistent result. Now, there has been a lot of press coverage about this, and we want to make a big deal about it. And so we're willing to shut jobs down at our own expense for a week, 2 weeks. One of these jobs, we were joint ventured with Lendlease, and Tom's company, is right there with us and committed to this. And the owner was right there with us too. And the trade unions were right there with us. So we think that's what it takes to change the industry. And I know we are having an effect because as we made all of these changes in our job sites in terms of reporting, signage, standardizing, like monitoring porta toilets and other graffiti, whether it's racist or not. Early on, a lot of the discoveries or the reports came from our own employees. Now, a lot of the calls that come into our hotline, these are from second tier, third tier laborers who feel comfortable raising the issue to a Turner employee. They may not speak English and they feel comfortable. These people have never had a voice on a construction site all the times, and now they do.
That's really incredible. And I think it takes that kind of strike team approach, zero tolerance approach, to send a message to everybody and, really be out and saying our culture is important to us. It's so important to us that we may lose money for this week or 2 weeks while we're figuring this out. That's how important it is to us. So that's got to send a powerful message, as you said, not just to your employees, but to your subcontractors and others who are on their site. So that is well done. Did anybody else want to add on that? I don't know. I understand that, some of these incidents certainly may have happened at your companies. How have you handled them? Similarly, hopefully similarly to Patrick, but how do you deal with the impact they have on your culture and the impact your response has on your culture?
And if I could just add, first of all, really that was a learning moment for Lendlease and me personally with respect to the response to the incident at one of our joint venture sites. I think, our companies, probably all of our companies are familiar with shutting down a job where we have a safety incident, where somebody's health or safety is put in jeopardy. I'm sure that we all do that. But to treat some type of incident where people are being potentially treated, a racially motivated attack or threatened attack is treated the same way, right? That it's, like you said, Angela, it's more important than profit, right? It's more important than, you can lose thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, but it's more important. I think that sends, to make sure you've got it right, sends a strong message. And, I think kudos to Turner for, I think, leading that. I think that was a really terrific, result, and says a lot about priorities. So powerful moment for me.
It's interesting to me that you have incidents like that, and then you have folks like the audience member who asked the question, how do you convince somebody that racism exists? At the same time, you're juggling these clearly racially motivated incidents, and it's always interesting to me how that connection sometimes isn't made, that connecting of the dots. But that may be a good segue to an important question that I think has probably impacted all of us, and that is just in today's very tense and divided political climate, how have you approached D&I in any different way? Has the political climate impacted your approach in any way? And I guess a second related question is just about, we talked earlier about the Trump administration's order on diversity training, just connecting those two. Has that made any difference in terms of either your approaches or feedback that you're getting back from your people?
Well, I would say, Angela, I'm not really familiar. I'm not that familiar with the order because we're really not doing federal work.
Okay.
But certainly, just from a mindset point of view, in my case, I think the political environment has strengthened my resolve to make sure that we continue to stay on the diversity initiative. It lets you, some of the language, some of the feedback lets you know if you don't push that initiative, is something that will become not important to some people. So I think it's important from my perspective to continue to push the initiative.
We do. Go ahead, Sara.
Nope. Thanks, Patrick. I was on 2 points thinking about your two questions, Angela. I think, in terms of sort of backlash and some of the challenges, and there are always going to be pockets of people within the company or on the greater job site that maybe are resistant to these ideas. And I think you have to do what you can to bring people along. Our role as an employer, we can only do so much. And so I think providing the resources and the training and the education is critical. And I think, people's personal stories for us have gone a long way. When you can foster relationships with folks within your organization from different departments, from different backgrounds, you get to a level of understanding that I think can change, hearts and minds more so than a training. And so I think we've tried to focus on that and let people know that, it's better to, with a lot of these topics, it's better to show up imperfectly than not show up at all. So it's okay if you don't know the politically correct term. It's okay if you feel differently. We respect your opinions and thoughts as well. But at the end of the day, we all have a common goal, and that's to build this building. And so we have to come together for that. And if you still can't get over it, then, as was alluded to earlier, then this isn't the right place for you. And that's okay. But we're going to send a clear and swift message that that's not, the culture we want here. And I think on the executive order piece, we're looking at our trainings to make sure that we're not running afoul of anything. But, that order, there's a mischaracterization of, unconscious bias training and so forth. So I won't get into that here. But we're looking at our training to make sure that we're not running afoul of anything and that, we're not. So I'll leave it at that.
Just add, we're doing the same. We're looking at the trainings, looking at the election results. So making contingency plans.
As a well-prepared business should. So that makes sense. One of my questions was going to be about how you create buy-in. And the only reason I say it was going to be is really all of you have stressed that culture and the buy-in at the top really exists where you are. But for others who may not have an environment like the ones that you have, how do you get that leader to be more active, to, as Michael said, walk the walk, not just talk the talk? So not just buy-in, but how do you create accountability around real meaningful change? And again, I know this doesn't seem like an issue with any of you where you are, but it might be for others. So anything you can share on that might be helpful.
I think this is really hard, particularly if you don't have buy-in from the top. I mean, I'll tell you the way it works here. Starting back in March, we started having company meetings every Friday. That's for 10,500 people spread around the world. And this is an hour-long webcast with our CEO. And it's a conversation. And he gives remarks and opens it up to questions. These are not pre-screened questions. So, a lot of stuff comes through.
Very brave.
Yes. But our CEO, he is a feeler, and he feels this. He's very passionate about racial justice and caring for our people. So that comes through those webcasts every single week. And we report on the bad news when we have bias-motivated events, as well as good news throughout the company. So it certainly sets the tone at the top. And then from there, it goes to the executive vice presidents and the SVPs, and making sure that they're accountable and they're having the conversations to their direct reports, and that they're equipped to have the conversations, and that they have to confirm they have the conversation. So it's, but it has to start at the top.
Anyone else?
I mean, I agree. It's if you don't have the tone at the top, it's very hard to implement and to make change and to be effective. I'm not sure how you change, because I thought the question also was asking how you try to change the tone at the top if you don't have the tone at the top. And that's another good question that I don't really know the answer to. Other than you go someplace where they do. You say I'm going someplace where they do. That's. But there are probably tools that you can use that I just don't quite understand. But that certainly is one that if that's not the way you're behaving, then I don't want to be a part of it. And I think there are plenty of people who say that, and they say it loud and clear. And there need to be more. But that's good. It's another very good question. Go where they do.
That makes sense. Well, I wanted to remind folks that if they do have questions, to please go ahead and submit those to the Q&A. We'll set a little bit of time to make sure we get to those. And so I'll wrap up with our prepared questions and then switch to audience questions. Debbie, you can help us with that. But to wrap up, I would love to hear from each of you in terms of, if you had one piece of advice for other companies or your industry to make meaningful change in diversity and inclusion, what would it be? Whether it's setting up a program for maybe companies that are not as far along as yours, or external facing, how do we make a difference more broadly in our industry?
Angela, I can start. I know for CIM, for me in this role, it has been keeping equal business opportunity at the forefront of everyone's mind. So any project that we're going to enter into is saying that we must have this participation and have the access for minority, female, and small businesses to be able to participate. So I think that sometimes in our industry, you hear people say, well, there may not be any, small firms, or there may be no female-owned firms or minority-owned firms that can do this scope of work. And I think that that's sometimes how people have gotten away from actually, providing that access to those companies. So I think having that conversation at every aspect of the development or the project is very important.
Repetition and driving it home.
Yes.
I'll go next.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my suggestion or advice would be, you think that bias events and racist events aren't happening at your job site, then you're not looking. And so it's there, and you should create a system where local leadership, if you're a big company, where they're accountable. And this, a lot of times the discussion is always like, you want the local leaders to be in charge of the business. This is one area where it really helps to have a standard approach and involve people from headquarters functions, help them with this process. The learning curve will be much better, and you're more likely to get it right.
Michael?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think a few things. One is to really start moving in this direction. You probably need to bring more people to the table to bring suggestions and ideas than what you normally do. Obviously, you need to. You need to bring all types of people, women, different races, which so broaden, so make the table of real opinions and thoughts a broader table than what typically happens today. I think two is to be intentional. Just be intentional, because this isn't going to happen because you kind of want it to, or you've seen another company do it. You have to be very intentional. And I'm also, as you look at this issue, I think it's, we all need to be realistic about how quickly we can change the dynamic. It's not as if, George Floyd happened, 6 months ago. Things are not going to change in 6 months. I think we have to be intentional and be patient around recognizing that change is going to take some time, but it's going to be a slow process, but over time it will be substantial and real, and we have to be realistic about that. I think that's what I'm saying. We can't. Things are not going to change overnight, but I think they will change with time if everybody stays focused on the agenda.
Agreed. Tom or Sarah?
Sure. I think the old adage about time, talent, and treasure is appropriate. Do you see that resources? Are you investing actual resources towards these efforts? Do you have somebody? If you can't afford a dedicated resource, can you have a shared part of one of your existing resources that's dedicated towards these initiatives? And as you said, making sure people are accountable, and that's done frequently and it's kept top of mind. And do you have the right talent? Is it coming from the right places? Are the people who others are listening to, is that, do you hear that in their lexicon? Do you hear that in the way they in the way they address the business? Do you hear it in the way they speak with others? So I do think that there needs to be structural, formalized efforts, and then there needs to be repeated measuring of information and striving to improve. That's constantly, like we do in construction itself. We're measuring everything, and we're recording it, and we're looking at it. So I think you need all of that.
Yeah, measuring progress in this area the same way we do with profits and other business metrics.
Yep.
Sara?
Yeah, I mean, to build on everything the panelists have said, I think you've got to strive, if you're just starting out with a program, you've got to strive to really embed this in every level of the organization and every process. It can't just be D&I over here in this box. It has to permeate everything you do at every level. You have to look into the unglamorous work of unpacking your policies and procedures and starting there. And it's got to be, to Tom's point, you got to commit the resources. It has to be authentic, and that has to come from the leaders. It can't just be a check the box or a showmanship. You have to put the time and the effort and the resources into it. And to Michael's point, I learned this the hard way. Patience, patience, patience. This is going to be an incremental change. Things are going to move slowly, but those things will add up and you will start to see progress. So I guess keep the faith is my hopeful message. And then, kudos to panels like this in terms of how we change the industry. I think it takes bringing, wonderful folks like on this panel together. How can we put our collective minds together to help change things in the industry? Who are some of the external partners we can draw from? Because it is really going to take all of us to really move the needle here. So thanks for the great panel.
Thank you all. Big tent, big table, lots of voices, and keeping the faith. That's very good. Debbie, it looks like we may have one question about unintended or unexpected consequences. Did you want to ask that before we wrap up?
Sure. So a couple of questions. So that's one of them. Have you all seen any surprising or unexpected or unintended, good or bad consequences of your diversity inclusion efforts?
I have one. This is perplexing. So, as I mentioned, we make a big deal of any bias-motivated event, and there's been press coverage in certain circumstances, and one, we err on the side of contacting law enforcement of a potential crime. And there was one police department, a local police department, that looked at all this press coverage and said, "Wow, Turner must be a racist company, has all these problems throughout the country. Nobody else seems to have these problems." So,
right, and really, you guys are out there trying to address these problems, and so that's why it seems.
Yeah. So.
Unintended consequence of tracking, right? Now there's something to measure.
Right. And there's another question that kind of follows on what Tom was talking about talent. Do the panel members have any specialized or targeted recruiting efforts that you found to be effective in encouraging minorities or other diverse individuals to apply?
I can jump in real quick on our sourcing strategy. The easy thing to do that we've tried to do is start directly recruiting and partnering with historically Black universities and colleges. And even within the traditional colleges that we've always recruited from, are we reaching out to affinity groups within those colleges? Are we accessing the diverse population in those colleges? So we've really tried to target where we're recruiting and what recruiting events we're participating in. And again, it's breaking down the cycle of folks sticking with what they know in terms of hiring. So that's been, again, we keep talking about culture. That's been the cultural shift we're really trying to target.
we've done the same, and are hopeful that that continues to have successful results. We'd like more progress in that regard than we've seen to date. So we'll keep plugging at it.
The other thing I'll add real quick, and there's been an effort to think outside the box there. So we've been looking at local technical high schools and other educational groups at the high school level, and can we form partnership and relationship with kids earlier on and really help them up through the construction industry and start to convince people that I think it was Bridget earlier that said construction isn't just nails and hammers anymore. Someone said it. It's a different industry, and can we start really investing in our communities and start attracting kids at a younger age to come up through the ranks and hopefully work for Suffolk one day. I think there's opportunities there for the industry too.
One other thing that just came to mind is twice a year we have across our globally something called Community Day, where people are allowed to look to various places where they see need, and it ranges across the scale of addressing poverty, looking to plant gardens to and it really allows you to kind of you can dream it up. If it's going to help others and help the community, you can, Lendlease's foundation will support it. And what we've allowed to do is that these volunteering activities can relate to racial justice. We think that actually elevating that to one of the categories that you can choose, that now becomes something that's more visible, selected, and a part of that Community Day. So intentionally giving thought to it. Yeah.
That's all the questions that we have so far from the audience. But I had another question as I was researching ENR, if you which is great. I mean, ENR, everybody knows that magazine. If you search the word diversity in there, I mean, they are highlighting this topic as well. And I'm wondering how important it is to your companies that you receive the D&I accolades that are out there. I saw, for example, Turner received the perfect score on the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equity Index for the past 4 years. Are these things that your companies are striving for, and you are looking at what metrics those accolades are based upon, or are those things that just happen because of what you do? A little bit of chicken and egg question. How you approach things like that?
I think it is more those accolades come just based on what we're doing. That's my understanding. I'm not aware of any campaigns where we're trying to get an award. We haven't reached out to the press for any press coverage on what we're doing, and we're happy to share. One of the reasons I'm participating in this is that we want to share the message. We're willing to share materials just to spread the word, but we're not chasing awards.
But then once you receive those awards, right, then you want to make sure that you continue to be on those lists, and maybe it begets additional behavior that's helpful for furthering D&I efforts. Once there's a taste of those, well, great, we're getting a pat on the back. Let's do more.
Yeah, Debbie, let me add. I know all of the firms on this panel are firms that are growing and have a broad way of thinking. I think any company today who's not looking to include diversity and inclusion is really limiting their future. I mean, in the construction industry, we know it's women are becoming so much more prevalent than they were 25 years ago, obviously. And all nationalities, we need all this talent at the table to really help our companies be the best they can be. And it's not going to be a white men business anymore. Everybody knows that. I mean, anybody who's who's thinking at all, we got to bring, all of these different people to our businesses to continue to thrive. So I hear what you're saying about getting accolades and how do you kind of promote them. And I think obviously, I think it doesn't hurt to let potential candidates know that your company, is acknowledged for some of the things you do. But certainly the culture is what's going to keep people around. But having a culture of diversity and inclusion, to me, if you're not doing that, then if you're my competition, I'm looking at that and saying, great, because you're not going to be relevant, as time goes along, because this business is becoming just it has such a need for diversity, both of thought and gender and race and everything. So I'll stop there, but it's just, to me, it's almost a no-brainer,
Right.
as we move forward.
Well, Angela, I didn't know if you, I think you said you had one closing question for everybody. Is that? Oh, Angela is there. Maybe we lost Angela.
Yep. No. No, Angela's there, but
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking to John, but I did ask my final question, which was really about giving advice to folks. And we concluded that we will all keep the faith as we struggle to make progress and to be patient as we, realize that these issues are not going to be solved overnight. And I think Michael's advice about making sure that you bring a lot of people into that conversation is really important. I really appreciate all of the good advice from everyone. It's been really helpful for me, even though we are a law firm and we do work with the construction industry and many other industries. I think all of these suggestions and thoughts can really be applied to any industry. So I thank you all for being thoughtful and sharing a lot of that very creative approaches to D&I. So thank you.
And I agree, Angela. I just wanted to offer a few words of thanks. One, to the attendees who either attended live or who are watching this program as a webinar. We really appreciate your involvement. You're willing to learn, you're willing to grow. The fact that you're striving in your companies to affect change for diversity and inclusion. Also, I want to thank the panelists. Each of you really had insights that I think were helpful to the industry, helpful hopefully to each other, certainly helpful to me and Debbie and Angela in terms of learning what's going on and what is improving. And I think, there is reason to keep the faith. There seems to be progress, but as Michael and Sara said, and I think everybody agrees, it's a continuing effort. And I think we all dedicate ourselves to that. And I want to thank the firm actually for dedicating the resources to this. There are people behind the scenes who I would thank, Lauren Domingo, Lindsay Fisher, Jay Shahid, who kind of make it possible, and mostly to Angela Payne-James for her participation. Everybody has worked really hard, and including Debbie and the panelists, in trying to put together a program that would be helpful and educational for everyone. So I want to thank the firm for devoting the resources and allowing us to devote the resources to do that. I think in a way, this is a bit of a self-selected group in that we are all committed to affecting change, to being engines of change. And I think that's terrific. I think we collectively can make change. We can also bring other people into, into our worlds to assist and to grow and to learn, like I said, to make change. So I think we all have to keep up our efforts to do that. So with that, I really do thank everybody who participated. And I think we are adjourned, or the program has concluded. Thank you all.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.